Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday's serial, a little off the beaten path, but I wanted to take a minute to talk a bit about Invincible. And a large part of the reason I want to do this is I don't really hear anyone talking about this book anymore, and I can imagine a big part of that is because picking up the singles would be trying. Invincible is a great series, and I'm going to dive into that, but to its detriment, like I imagine a lot of the way Kirkman writes, the singles aren't just not as appealing. The way this book moves, which is very fast, very loosely paced, and some issues can feel like they have no weight at all. Without them being collected, it would just lose its punch. Also, the frequency at which the issues come out make it even a little less appealing at times. And there's been some very large breaks in the series, as this is Kirkman's B book in his priority based on the rate it comes out and whatnot. The Walking Dead comes first, and it's very understandable why. But personally, I think Invincible is the better work. Though, at the rate I get to enjoy it, I don't mind that there's breaks or whatnot, because it seems like that's allowed to keep the quality of this book where it has been. So, for the uninitiated, Invincible is Mark Grayson, whose dad was a superhero, and so he always knew he would develop powers, and one day just gets them, and that's basically where the tale begins. Things evolve really quickly. I don't want to spoil too many twists, but his father, Omni-Man, is an alien, really, not just a superhero, and that explains the whole deal. It's very akin to Superman in that way, but not played like the Kryptonians exactly either. It's much more family-based than even, like, the L's were. And that becomes part of the story, and in a lot of ways, as much as I enjoy it, it's not even the most interesting part of Invincible. A lot of the interesting parts are more of the superheroics and the near pseudo-political level that some of the stories take. Whereas the book started as a very kind of DC parody almost-esque, and the book was a lot lighter. As the stories developed, there was a certain amount of tone, but things got a lot darker, and upon a time, the book was criticized for actually becoming a lot bloodier than it once was, which was a whole tonal shift, and I kind of get it, because when you start reading the book, it's pretty normal superhero levels of gore and whatnot. There's a book, I collect them in these Ultimate volumes, which is the equivalent of 2 trades, except they're oversized, and you get a lot of cool back matter if you want to pour through that. And if you do any amount of deal shopping, you can usually get these at a pretty discounted rate, which makes them usually about the cheapest way to collect the series, as long as you're not, back bin diving or anything. So, if you're looking to get into this, highly recommend the Ultimate Collections. Also, hardback. But as I was saying, a couple of those editions back, so a while back, and these things take about a little over a year for each one to come out, it seems like. Now, after they caught up. The bloodiness got kind of even too far for my enjoyment at one point, when there was something called the Ventilate, or I cannot pronounce that made-up word. They're all made up. But the blood of the battles was just double-page spreads of just, like, body parts flying, and just blood and blood and blood. It was like, there's not that much blood in a body. I mean, they're aliens, so I guess they can do whatever they want. It's real, whatever. But it was just... It was just gory past the sake of being grisly to create a sense of realism. It was just bloody for the sake of being bloody. And that was one part, and it was a little hard, but if you push through that, the story picks up again. And that's a lot of where this volume is, and that's more of where my mind is, and since it's been honestly years since I read some of that, my memory's a little hazy, and I should really revisit it, because what I'm trying to expound to you all is that Invincible isn't just a good superhero comic. In a lot of ways, and this is why I'm sad it's not mentioned as much, Invincible is one of the best superhero stories, especially currently being told. And right now it's interesting because it has a lot more legacy than anything in DC or Marvel, because there are no reboots. There's some setbacks to the status quo, but that's almost any serialized fiction. And so what makes it interesting is how it deals with its themes. Invincible grew up. So as it started as a, parable coming of age tale, teen superhero, Mark kept getting older. So we went past college to adult, and then from, past like serious dating around girlfriend to at this point we're looking at proposal. That's it's not even spoilers though, because it's so built up, you see it coming, but it's earned and it feels right when it's there, but it's still just as emotional. But it's one of those things that it will be just as impactful when you reread it as when you initially read it, because it's not something that's meant to shock the readers, this big romantic reveal along with all the action reveals, of which there are plenty, and there are plenty of twists in the story. It's just not in the relationships, which people who lead these kinds of lives, that's part of the normalcy, and that's kind of what they play on, and it makes a lot more sense for superheroes of a certain mindset to not be sleeping around as much as wanting to be in a committed relationship, because they need that stability when they're done dealing with all the crazy things that they deal with. That's the other interesting part too, is a lot of the villains that Mark has built up over the years have a lot to do with him charging headlong and how he dealt with them. Maybe they were wrong, but maybe he overstepped or whatnot, because he was the superhero, and it's a couple of cases honestly not knowing his own strength and causing a worse situation. And in this volume, dealing with the Dr. Dinosaur character, who is a villain who wants to make the world better, you see that, and this happened in an earlier volume, where he's setting up something in Vegas to create kind of an extinction event because the world's overpopulated, and so he's dealing with that. But when you see the larger picture, you see that he's trying to do the right thing, but he's a bit misguided, and then Invincible kind of takes that and works with that, and so yeah, there was wrongs, but you're also dealing with a super scientist, so why not try to use that intelligence to do something better? There's government agencies that have resources that are maybe a bit misguided, but he says he can rise above and do better, and maybe not necessarily. Meanwhile, there's a whole bunch of hijinks going on, plays with powers and how he's able to deal with, and as the villains increase in scope to match his power level, as they would if like Superman was developing or whatever, you also see a scale of the crimes going on, and you also see a bit of more of a moral decay, I guess, because you're not dealing with bank robbers anymore. You're dealing with people who feel they are the right, whether or not you have a diametrically opposed opinion, or if it's a bit more shady, but things often do come to blows because the argument leads them there. It's not just they're fighting right off the bat. They talk it out and then they come to blows. Because this edition's more recent, and I imagine a lot of people haven't read it, this is where I want to start to go a little more vague, but a lot of the conflict in this volume comes down to more of a philosophical bit after the blows are thrown, and how the villains see. And what's interesting is you can almost see a twist in how Kirkman wants to tell the tales, and suddenly, instead of trading on strength, trading on reasoning becomes more valuable in the universe, because the power sets are so high and because the fights are so bizarre. It almost needs to like come back down in a way to the debate to be more interesting. And for that, this book has a certain sci-fi-esque feel that I believe used to be more present in more superhero fiction and is less present now. But because you couple that with Mark's ongoing tale, where he's never the perpetual teenager, he's kind of always in his late 20s, early 30s look, which is where a lot of superheroes are. But I mean, keep in mind, he started as a teenager and moved through all the stuff, and then as in a way life slows down. But in a lot of ways that makes sense too, because as you get older, the like seasons of your life kind of lengthen. Like, you know, when you're 2 months old versus when you're 3 months old, it's a bigger thing. When you're 2 versus 3 years old, it's a bigger thing. But once you get to be like 7 or 8, not so much. Then you just kind of end up in your early teens. And it's like your mid-teens. Then it's your late teens, which kind of bleed in, except for there's that really breaking year, at least in our society, of 21. And then not so much for a good long while. And then it's more on your life when major life events do, or in some ways do not happen. And so in a way this book kind of reflects that kind of growth, not just with the main character, but with many of the other characters. And you start to see bits of immaturity and worrying in the parents reflected as he gets older. And it's interesting because, especially for me, because I read this book when I was a bit younger, in a lot of ways it feels like this book's grown with me, which is great. And I feel like that's a lot of where some other comics fall apart with their readership, when they have to roll back, as it were. So I apologize for being maybe a bit too vague, and I'd love to dive into Invincible a little more if anyone is interested in talking about it. And also, if I've intrigued you at all and you are looking to read Invincible, please let me know. I'd love to talk about it more, and yeah, keep reading some awesome comics, and I'll hit you all soon with another comic review.